Hello everyone, it's Andy here again with another video, this time focusing on the actual code breakdown for Custom Conquest template that we've put together. This is on version 6.1 and from here onwards I don't see too many changes being made to the code, so I thought today's probably a good day to be able to actually go in, break it down, go through the different rules and explain how things work so you can get a bit of a better understanding on how this is set up. And at the same time, it'll hopefully help you learn a thing or two. And for people that are new to Portal, I'm hoping that this will be helpful to you as well. I'll be going through some of the basics and explaining how I've done things and why, and what sort of behaviours we would expect. I'll also explain why I've done certain things to try and get around some of the bugs that I've come across through with Portal, and I'm hoping that these will be fixed in the future. So let's just have a general glance, a bit of an overview of the structure of the blocks themselves. Right in the middle here, we've got this mod block, and essentially this, whatever is attached within this mod block runs every tick on the server, and it will run through each of these rules that we've got going on here, each doing different things. And these will have different rules from on, like when players deploy, when they get kills, things like that. And then these little orange areas here, that you can see, are subroutines. If you're familiar with like scripting, these are more just like functions that you can call at any time. And these are dotted around. So the ones that actually do sort of functionality, I've tried to put them to the right side. And then on the left side, what I have is all these appends which set up the arrays that I've got set up on here. Okay, so that's just a rough layout on how I have done things. So we're going to go through each of these rules just now and explain what each of them do. So starting right off, we have our initialization, the event ongoing global. Well, what this does is that as soon as the server starts, we want to define some things. A lot of these are variables. I've got a plugin at the moment for Firefox which turns these variables red. It's just easier for me to be able to see them. So if yours is green, don't worry, this is just something that I've modified on my side to make it easier to read. So these set variables, these just set up the different variables that we've got throughout the rule set that we've got. So for anyone that is familiar with the bots, we've had to do a workaround and create our own ones. So for anyone that doesn't want to mess around with the program, we've just got this set variable up here to just enable or disable the custom bots that we've got implemented. And the same goes for the team switcher. This one you can control from here, just true or false, whether you want people to be able to change teams. Next up, I have this variable here, the event game ongoing. This is used later on just so that only certain parts of the code will run while we've defined that the game is running and when the game ends. For instance, like the score, the bleeding of the tickets, we only want that to happen while the game is running. You don't want it to still be bleeding tickets after the game's ended and getting negative points. Next up, these two variables here. So we've got, you might have noticed you've got global player and team variables set up in this experience. Your global ones can be used anywhere. You've got some that are set for teams. So you can say like, here you've got like the team score, you can say like for team 1 or for team 2. So that's easier later on. I set up a variable called other team. So I can say the other team of team 1 is team 2. You'll see that later on, it'll make a bit more sense. We've got our starting score. So the starting number of tickets per team. And then we can set the actual team score. And the reason we have these two separately is that later on we're going to be using the calculation for like the ticket bar at the top of the screen where it shows you the percentage remaining. We can compare the total amount to what the team actually has to work out how big the bar should be. And just to make it a little bit easier when setting up the UI, we can set up I've got it defined of the different positions that we've got for the scores on the left and the right. And the colors for the UI, they're done in vectors, or, well, it's using vectors. Essentially, it's RGB, red, green, blue. And I'm just predefining these. So you've got the friendly text color. We've got the background color, which is a bit darker. We've got the enemy text color, and then the enemy background color. You'll see that you've got these little references here as part of the initial setup. So we've got the unique player UI, and that takes us to this array here. Essentially what I'm doing is that for every player, I'm giving them like a unique ID to go along with their HUD, well, their custom UI element when they're going on to an objective, and it shows you how many players are on the point. We'll come back to this later on and I'll explain why we have this specifically. Okay. And I've got a second one for the second custom UI element for the player, which again is another subroutine, and I've had to give it unique names. We've got the objective letters. Again, sorry, I should have explained this. If I right click on this, it'll show it to jump to subroutine, so it'll take you straight to where it's calling it. And this is just setting the letters at the top of the screen where you've got the different icons for each of the flags to show who's in control of them. I've just set it up from A to Z so we can have every single possible flag should someone go crazy and want to go to Z. And what we have here is the objective team UI array. Yes, this again is essentially the UI element needs to have a unique name. So we've got from A to Z with 1, and then A to Z with 2, because we've got the UI element for team 1 and we've got the UI element for team 2. Again, it'll make a bit more sense later on when we cover the UI. And then what we have last is our bot names. So we've got a list of the different names that we're giving to the bots at the moment. If you want your name added, you can let me know either in the comments or in the Battlefield Portal Discord. And that does us for the initial setup. So that just covers some of the core basics. Before it even loads the map, just core information in the background. Once the game has actually started, we've got this map set up here, the OnGameModeStarted. And that's where we can now set like the game time limit. You can't set this before the game starts because it needs to load the level before you can define how long the match is going to be. So one thing that we have here is the set game mode target score as 1. And you might be wondering to yourself, why is it only set as 1? And this comes down to one of the bugs that I've come across at the moment, which is the end game mode block does not work. So therefore, the default game mechanics is when you reach the target score, it will automatically end the game mode for you. So at the end of the game, I'm setting the score to 1. And that is where it'll then force the game to end automatically for us to get around this issue. And this goes back to why already we've got this variable that we set up for both teams for the score so that we can manually track it ourselves without relying on the game, so we can end it on our terms. Then underneath that, you see that there's a subroutine for the scoreboard. This just sets up the scoreboard itself. So we've got the scoreboard with the column names. So that'll give the different titles at the top of your scoreboard. So we've got score, kills, deaths, assists, and captures. Now I've left revives in here because I do actually track revives in the background. Some people might want to track revives instead of assists, you know. We've got to be able to pay respects to the medics doing their hard work. And I'll come back to some of this later on because we will be going through this, which is essentially updating the text for the scores on like the left and the right for both teams, but it also updates the timer, but we'll come back to that. So after we set up the scoreboard, we have this four variable loop here, which is setting up the capture points around the map. And what it's doing is that this loop, if you're new to loops, essentially we've got this variable, I've named it iterator, and it counts from 0. And it finds all of the capture points on the map, and it counts how many of them. So say if you've got 5 objectives, this block is an array. Now that'll just be a list of them. It'll go from 0, so it'll set up the capture point for value in array. So the first one, A, for example, it'll do A. Once it's completed, go up by 1. Right, next one, B. Next one, C, D, E. You get it. And what we're doing here is, you'll notice this has what we call a parameter. And this is going off to a subroutine, and it's sending the objective that we have selected. So in this particular case, say if it's A. So if I right click on this and go to jump to subroutine, this is what it's doing here. This is getting the objective, it's getting A. So enable the game mode, true. Set the capture point capturing time to 15, the neutralization time to 15, the capture multiplier to 1. So it's doing it all for A. Let's get our subroutine argument. Go back to here. So I hope that makes a bit more sense. So it starts from 0, counts up 1 by each time, so A, B, C, D, E. Once it's done that, we've now got this set variable of game1 going true. So you see how at the very, very start, when the server spins up, we've set that to false. Now once the game is set up, the flags have been turned on, they're in place. Now we can set that to true. And that follows on to the next rule, which is another ongoing global. Now we've got conditions here. We've got 2. So the first one is that it's saying it's got to wait for the game mode to be ongoing. Well, there we go. So after the game's set up, that's now true. So now this rule can start running. Now, there's 2 here, update score and time. What this does is that the second rule here, you'll notice there's a slight difference between them. So this is using a modulo, which is getting the time that's elapsed, how long has the game been running. And it does a check to see how many 2s fit into it. And depending on the outcome, whether it's 0 or 1, it'll then run the rule. So we've got these run every other second. So it goes, well, rule 1, rule 2, rule 1, rule 2, and it's every second it's jumping between the 2 of them. The reason that we're doing this is that rules will only run once when triggered. So if I have just this rule here, it's ongoing. It only run once because it's got to go to false before it'll run this again. It's not continuous. So that's where we've got this rule that comes in, and it'll say, like, on, for example, every even number, it'll run this rule. On every odd number, it'll run this rule instead. So it jumps every second between the 2 of them. So these both refer to subroutines, and this is why we use subroutines, so that we can reference them at any point and we're not duplicating code, we're just recalling it So if I jump back to the scoreboard, remember earlier how we had, we set up the scoreboard initially. So every second we're updating the scores, we're updating the bars, the percentage that's left, and we're also updating the objective icons at the top as well for whose possession each objective is in. And it also updates the time that's remaining as well. But again, we're going to go back into that a little more in depth when we cover the setup of the UI itself. And the last thing that we've got within these times is the add AI. Now, in the current version of Portal, AI do not play the objectives. So what we've had to do is create custom AI, spawn them in manually, and then program them to play the objective for us. So if I jump to this subroutine, the add AI, that here shows if the AI are enabled. Now, if you remember back at the start when we had a look at the initialization, we had the option to be able to toggle the AI on and off. So only if the AI is enabled will it actually run this rule. Second of all, we can actually say only add AI if there is less than 60 people in the server. This includes bots and humans. So if you only want, say, 20 bots to fill up until you've got 20 players, you could actually set this to 20. So once there's 20 people in total, it won't spawn any more in at all. I'm just going to leave that at 60 for now. And what we've got here, we've got two spawners. So it says if, essentially, if I, again, this is to do with the tool that I have, and this is just to make it a bit easier. This is with the 2042 plugin. So just to break it down a little easier. So it's saying if this is greater than that. So we have all of the players. So that's getting an array or a list of all the players that are in the server. And it's using a filtered array. And it's saying get the team ID of that player or the current array element. And are they team 1? And once it's filtered everyone that's on team 1, it'll grab a count of how many are on team 1. And it'll do the same for team 2. And this is just to find out, are there more people on team 1 than team 2? So if there's more people on team 1, it will then spawn an AI onto team 2. And then if it's anything else, which would be team 2, more people on team 2, it'll then spawn an AI on team 1 instead. And this spawn AI actor, we have a few boxes in here. So we've got the AI spawner itself. So within Godot, I've got a spawner for either team. And we can say, well, this is going to be the spawner for team 2. And we've got this message block here, which actually allows us to give the bot a name. Now, if you remember earlier, we had the array of all the players. And all we're doing is we're seeing we want to have a random value within the array of the bot names. So it'll pick a name at random and assign it to one of the bots. And then lastly, we're saying which team that we're wanting it on. So in theory, you could actually have two lists of names for either team, but just to simplify things, I've just kept it as one. Let's go back up, shall we? So next up, we have the actual score tracker. What this does is that this actually manages the ticket bleeding for both of the teams based on how many flags that they have captured. I've not played enough of the game yet to actually understand what the original game logic is. However, this will do at the moment and can be tweaked at any time. I might tweak it later on, but you can change it yourself. So essentially what I'm doing is a bit like how we have here, where it's running every other second. This is running every 4 seconds. And again, we've got the only when the game is running or ongoing. And we're saying based on the time that's elapsed, every 4 seconds, we want to run this rule. So we're setting up the team score for team 1 and for team 2. And how are we calculating that? Well, we are using a subtract. So what we're going to do is, again, just for presentation, I'm going to show you how this is doing it. So what we're doing is we're getting the variable of the team score. So what's the score for team 1? And we're going to subtract the count of capture points that are owned by team 2. So if team 2 own no flags, it's subtracting 0, so no change. If they have 5 flags, then it will subtract 5 points every 4 seconds, or 5 tickets. And it's the same for team 2 as well. So they're saying get the points of team 2 and then subtract the number of flags that team 1 has. Additionally, this is just to speed up the game a little bit. So if all of the capture points, so we say is true for all the capture points, is the current team owner team 1. So if all of them are owned by team 1, then we're subtracting an additional 10 points from team 2 every 4 seconds. And then we're using an else if to say is true for all. So are all capture points owned by team 2? At which point we then start subtracting 10 points every 4 seconds from team 1. But as you can see, when you start stacking multiple blocks together, it can get a little bit messy, but I'll try and explain it as we go through. So next up, we've got the on player earned kill. And what we're doing here is that by default, the game actually does give you the option to get kills. So you can actually get the player kills, which is great, except it's got the issue of if they kill themselves with a grenade or if they respawn through the menu, it actually counts as a kill for that player against themselves, which isn't the most accurate. So to avoid that, what I've done is that I've got a variable here for the player kills. And the reason I've done that here is that we can actually put in a condition and we can say the player that's earned the kill is not the player that they have killed. So we're saying only if they get a kill that isn't themselves, we can then add 10 points. Now, if you're setting up a hardcore server, you might also want to do a check of a condition that the kill isn't on the same team ID as the player that's done the kill. So that's just something to think about. But for now, we're also setting the variable of the player and for their kills. And we're saying, well, get the player kills for the player and then give them an additional point. Once we've done all that, we can then update the scoreboard for the player. So every time that you want the player's stats to be updated on the scoreboard, you need to manually set it. So that's why you want to set your variables before you call, before you update the scoreboard. So we'll right click on this, and again, you can see I've got a parameter here for the event player. So if I right click on this, jump to subroutine, and you can see here, set scoreboard player values. So we're saying set it for the player, and we're going to get the player's score, which we've manually set up. We're going to get their kills, and then you can see we're using the get player deaths for the player. Now this one counts the way that we want to in any case, so we don't need to set up a variable for that. And then we've got the kill assists for the player. Now, if you, let's just move that back. Now, if you remember earlier, we had the option for assists and revives. And I've also done that for the subroutine here. So we've got the kill assists and we've also got the revive. So you've got the option there to switch them if you want. And then lastly, I've got the number of captures for the player. And we'll be going through the process for that later on. So we've done the on player earned a kill. Now we've got the on player earned a kill assist. Now there's not a stat for this in the game by default, so that's why what we've done here is, again, we're editing the score for the player, setting that up. We're going to give them 5 points instead of, I think it's, yeah, I've given 10 points if you get a kill, 5 points if it's an assist. And then we're getting the kill assists variable and setting that for the player, and then we're updating the scoreboard. On revived, this one's a little bit different. This explains why we've got this component here for the player that we're giving the points to. On revived, this is when if you as the player are revived, we want to reward the other player, the one that's revived you, the medic. So we're going to set the score for the event other player. So that's the person that's done the revive to you. We're going to get the variable for the other player for their score and add it by 10. And then we're going to set the variable for the revives for the other player. And then we're going to add that again to the revives of the other player. And then we're going to update the scoreboard for the other player. Next up, we have on player joins game. So this is when the player actually joins the game mid-match, for example. And you'll notice I've got a wait here, and there's a reason for this. So when the player joins the match, by default, their scoreboard is going to be blank. We've got to call for this to be updated so it at least presents zeros, like 0 kills, assists, points, the lot. However, if it runs straight away, it'll actually generate jargon. Like, I've joined a match and it said I had like 3 kills and 2 deaths. Well, I've not even spawned yet. So what you need to do is that you need to wait to allow enough time for the player to be able to load their stats and then update the player, then update the scoreboard for the player. Then what we have here is a variable for the player. Now this comes in later on when we're going to have a UI that pops up when the player goes onto a capture point to display the UI. And by default, we want this to be false, and you'll see why later on. And then next up, what we need to do is that we actually have to delete the UI for everyone and then add it back in. This is to get around an issue that I came across where you can set up the UI when the game loads. However, any player that joins in afterwards, they will not see the UI. So you've got to tell it to draw the UI. The problem is if it's drawn for you and then the player joins in, and it draws again, it will draw for you a second time. So you've essentially got 2 HUD elements on top of one another, which isn't ideal, and then it causes problems later on. So what we do is that we delete all the UI widgets. That needs correcting. And this is why it's good to be able to talk about code, because when you talk about it, you run through the process in your head, and then you start to make sense of what works, what doesn't work, what should logically work, and then what fails, as I have just realized. So by deleting all widgets, that's great. That'll update the HUD elements at the top of the screen. However, I've now realized that this is going to cause a problem. If you're on an objective, it'll delete the widget to say how many players are on the point. So what we're going to have to do is, instead of delete all UI widgets, we're going to have to disable them manually one by one. But for now, let's have a look at the main UI score and time. So this is where it's actually going to set up the UI. So this might look a bit daunting at first, and believe me, it took me a while to try and understand it myself. to set up in the first place. But essentially, what happens is that every UI element has to have a unique name. So within the main score and time, we start off with the add UI text for the timer. So this is the timer element at the top center of the screen showing what time's remaining. So we've got to say where it is in relation to the anchor. So we're going to say we're not moving it horizontally, but we are bringing it down vertically by 50. And then you've got the actual size of the element. So this will include the background. So we're saying it's like 85 wide by 30 tall. And the anchor is the top center of the screen. So we want it to come down from the top by 50. And then you've got your message itself on the screen. So you can see that we've got 3 brackets here with the dots in the middle. So that's to represent the minutes, tens of seconds, and seconds. So we're just dividing the time remaining by 60 to get the minutes. And then we're doing a modulo of that to then get the tens of seconds, and then we're just doing a modulo of the time remaining to then get the individual seconds remaining as well. Next thing I've got is the Team UI setup. Essentially, this is just a subroutine that I have used just to reduce the number of blocks that I'm using. So you can see that I can put the name of the element, the color of the element, so 111 is white. The background, I've just got it as black, so all zeros. You've got the font size and the alpha. The alpha is the transparency of the background. So if I jump to this rule, you can see here, I've got the set text color, set background color, text size. I just called it font size. The background alpha, set background widget fill. I've just gone for the blur. So you can get different types of backgrounds. It might be difficult to see, but you've got like blur, gradient bottom. So these are kind of like different like color gradients. So it kind of like fades in. You can actually set no background if you so wish. But rather than having these being repeated over and over and over again, I've just called it once with all these, and we'll use it multiple times later on. You see that we've got this Team UI setup, and we've got it later on for the other ones. So just like with the, here we go, we can set the UI text anchor. So we're setting the anchor of the text to the center. So that's just like center justifying the text within the UI element itself. So what we do is that we add the bars for the left and the right of the screen. And essentially they're just positive and negative of one another, you know, minus 160, plus 160. And again, top center, though there's no message, so I've just left it blank. And we're using the bar setup, so we've got the left bar, we've got the color. Now, if you remember back up the top, we defined these colors already. And the reason is because we're going to be calling them quite a lot. So you can see that the left side is the friendly color for background, and then the right side is background for friendly. And then we set up the UI for the Team 1. And I've got a little subroutine here. And because we're doing this for Team 1 and Team 2, the subroutine just allows us to make a change so that if we edit it for one team, it'll edit it for both of them. So you can see it'll compare the left score, right score, the left bar, the right bar, and set the anchor points. So we can go through and say, right, Team 1, here's all the elements. So we could say the score for the left side, the right side, the left bar, the right bar, and for which team it is, which in this case it's Team 1. And I don't know if you remember earlier, we had the other team. So we said the other team for team 1 is team 2, and for team 2 it's team 1. This is what it refers to. This is what simplifies things a little bit. So when we are getting, for instance, the score on the left side of the screen, we can say we want the score for the team on that we've submitted. So if we say team 1, it'll give us the score for team 1. But on the right side, we want the team score for the other team of the one we've submitted. So it'll be team 2. And we also refer to that later on when we're talking about the left bar and the right bar, and that's for the score that's remaining. You can see that we're using the get the team score of the team. Then for the opposing team, we say, well, get the element of the other team to this team that we're looking at. So if it's team 1, we'll get the other team, which is team 2. If you find it hard to follow, don't worry. This is kind of some of the more advanced stuff that we're doing with blocks. In some ways, I could have simplified this a little bit more by setting up the colors at the same time and some of the fonts, but I do have a separate scene. This sets up the UI elements. Again, text color, background, font size, alpha, and blur. So you can see that we're doing that for like the score on the left, the score on the right, the left bar and the right bar. And we're setting like the friendly colors, the enemy colors, and the background and the text. So finally we get to this loop here, this for variable. If you remember, we had the flags at the start where we said like we went to like A to Z, essentially, going through each of them. And we're doing this here for the icons at the top of the screen, showing you the current status of each of the flags. Now, the way that it's currently done is that if you have just one objective, you have just a single A icon at the top of the screen. So it'll say how many capture points. There's just one A. Okay, set up A. But if you've say got, like 4 or 5, for example, you'll have to go through each of them, like go through A, B, C, D, E, setting up each of the icons, and that's why we have this loop in here. So it sets up the text itself. We've got the position, so obviously to make this as easy as possible for everyone, this automatically calculates the position. So, for instance, if you've got A on its own, that's in the middle of the screen at the top. But if you've got A and B, you can't have A just in the middle and B to the right. It looks off. So what this calculation does is that it essentially automatically centers it for you. You can have a bit of a further look into that. It actually hurts my brain trying to explain it. So I'll leave this particular bit for now, but you can have a look through it. But it is all there. We've got the position, we've got the actual element itself. It's a square, so 30 by 30. It's at the top. And here we have the message. So remember how we had those flag letters back at the start? So it goes through A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and all the way to Z. So it goes through which index of which index are we on of the iterator. It'll then compare to the letter that we're on and set that up accordingly. And we're having to do this for team 1. The reason being is that we need to have 2 of these elements. So this goes back to how I was saying we needed unique names. So I've got like A1 will be for team 1's representation of the A flag on their HUD. And then further down we have A2, which is team 2's representation, because obviously one's going to be blue for one team and it's going to be red for the other team, and we want to represent that accordingly. And that's why down here we have our second for variable as well. It's essentially doing the exact same thing, but the difference is, because we've got A to Z 2 times, I'm using the same array, but I add 26 because there's only 26 letters in the alphabet anyway. So we go through our 26, get to Z1, then we go to A2, and so on and so forth. Again, this just simplifies the process for the code itself. And virtually everything else is identical. So when we go back to our scoreboard and how we're updating that every second, that's why we have so many elements. So we've got like team 1 score left, score right, the time, the bars for left and right. And then this sorts out the colors for all of the flags. So again, count of all flags, it's got this for variable going through each of the elements. You know, it'll check, is the current flag for team 1 or for team 2? And then it'll update the text and the background color for team 1 and then for team 2. And that'll do it based on whether it's team 1's control, team 2's control, or whether it is neutral. So now that we've moved on from dealing with all of that UI madness with the player joining the game, let's have a look at what happens when the player undeploys. And this is only when the game is ongoing. The reason being is we don't want a player to undeploy just after the match has ended to then reduce a point for that player. We want to just kind of lock it down. So what we do is, so if the player undeploys, they've not been revived, then we will deduct a point from the team of that player by 1. And then we will update the scoreboard for the player so that it shows the stats correct. And then once the player has updated the scoreboard, then we want to actually update the general scoreboard as well, because we now have a point that has now been deducted from that team. Next up is when the capture point is captured. I've given a split second of a delay because when the capture point is captured, there's a brief moment where it's still in the process of changing ownership in the background. So what we're doing is that we're doing a wait. We're then getting an empty array, because what we're doing is that we're going to get all the players that are on the objective. So it's an empty array just to clear it and set it up. Then we need to use a filtered array. So this is going to get all the players that are on capture point, so say capture point A, for example, and then it will compare each of the elements and get their team and see if they match the ownership of the objective. So if you've got 3 people on it, it'll then get those 3 people. It'll then loop through each of these players, again, the iterator, so we're getting the count of the players, like how many players were on it, so say 3 of them, and it'll go from 0 to 3, and it will go through each of these players, so we'll say get value in array of the players, so player 0, for example. It'll then go to this subroutine. And this subroutine will first of all set the captures for the player. It'll increase it by 1, and then it'll increase their score by a factor of 50. And then this is supposed to then play audio for the player, but that does not appear to be working at the moment. It's my understanding that should be fixed hopefully in the next update. And then we're going to update the scoreboard for that player. So it's going to go through each of them. So it'll go through like player 0, player 1, player 2. And then if you've seen the video on setting up the map for Conquest, you'll have noticed that Objective C in the demonstration pack has vehicle spawn on C. So if we right click on this objective vehicle spawn, you can see this is right at the top when you go in, and it'll check which map is it, and it'll check if the flag is a specific capture point, and then it'll check, right, okay, which team is it that owns it? If it's Team 1, spawn an Abrams. If it's Team 2, spawn a Leopard tank. Again, this was a bit more experimenting, which hasn't worked just yet. It's supposed to play a voice over to say that the capture point is being taken, and also to say to the other team that they have now lost an objective. Then finally, we're getting more towards the end game kind of side of stuff for the core gameplay mechanics. So only when the game is running will it check. Sorry, this is ongoing global. So this is always checking if the game is running, great, and then it's checking for any of the teams having less than equal to 0 tickets remaining. And I say less than equal to just in case someone has 1 point left and they lose, say, 5, then you go into the negatives. So you need to have less than equal to. So as soon as that happens, we're setting the game mode to, well, game ongoing to false. So we can't lose any more tickets. Then just to clean up the elements, what we're going to do is that if the score for Team 1 is less than 0, then we want to bring it back up to 0. And the same with Team 2. If it's less than 0, bring it back to 0. It just tidies it up a little bit. Then what I'm doing is that I'm moving the UI element of the scores at the top so it can show it nice and big for the end screen, and it'll update the scoreboard as well. And the reason we do that is that if we have to do any final adjustments to these points, then it'll reflect on the scoreboard to show that they've reached 0 instead of a negative. And then we've got just more blocks here that just update the UI elements themselves. We're deleting the bar at the top because that's no longer needed. We're just wanting the scores. And we've got the in-game UI. Again, this is then just changing like the size of the font and the sizes of the widgets, and then their position. And then based upon who has got the higher score. So if Team 1 has got more points than Team 2, then we want Team 1 to win. And remember how we were talking about at the start where the end game mode block is bugged at the moment. So we're actually using the default game scoring to trigger the end game for us. So then it's a case of we're saying if it's Team 2 has more points than Team 1, then it sets Team 2 to have 1 point that then wins them the game. And then if it's anything else, well, it must be a draw. So we set both of them to 1 point and it'll then declare the game as a draw. So next up we have the on-event enter capture point, where we have the get variable player not on point. So if you remember, we declared this when the player joins the match. Here we are. So we say that when the player joins the match, they are not on the point by default, obviously. But what we want to do is, this is to stop the rule from potentially triggering multiple times. So as soon as they go, if they're not on the point, it'll then run this rule. So when they step onto it, they're now on the point. And then what we're doing is that, again, every player has to have, well, every UI element needs to be unique. And the issue tends to come in with, so the player goes onto the point. If you've got 3 players that go onto the point, they each set it up 3 times, but as soon as one walks off of it, if I want to disable that, it'll disable it for all of them, because the only option that you get is a delete widget. And you can't say delete widget for this player, you've got to say delete this widget. So that's where what I've had to do is create this array, the unique UI ID. And then I have a second one, which is the unique background ID. Because what I have is, well, what you get is when you have a text element, you get, by default, you get the text and you get a background. But I also want to have a border, and that requires a second element. So that's why what I have for the player is that I have the text and then the outline. So over here, I have the unique ID. So whenever you're defining a variable, you've got to enter the array. So I have, by default, for the text and the background, it goes from 1 all the way through to 64, because it's 64 players that you can have. And then for the other element, I've got to give it a second one. So I've got ID, 1 all the way to 64. So then we add in the UI element for the outline, and we set that up. And then we do the text and we set that up. And then depending on the owner of the objective, we can set up the color. So if it's team of the player, then it's blue. If it's the other team of the player's team, then it's red. And then if it's neutral, then it's just white and grey. Simple. Then what we have is a while. And we say while the player is on the point, it'll loop through this, and it's doing a check. Now, unfortunately, the capture progress is not working. It's always reporting back 0. It's supposed to report back between 0 and 1 for the progress. 1 means it's fully captured. 0 means it's not got any capture progress at all, and that isn't updating. So essentially what's supposed to happen here is that if it is less than 1, depending on who owns it, it'll say you're either defending or capturing. And it's supposed to say that if it's completely captured or at 1, then it's supposed to say secured if you own it and contested if you don't. And you'll notice these little brackets here. If we go and jump across to the subroutine, the objective UI, and you'll see that it's getting the text for the player, and it's updating that with the count of players on the point relating to the same team as the player, so team 1 for example. And then for the second element, it is getting the filtered array of players that are on the other team of the player. So that will show you, that's how you can see the number of players that are on the point for you as opposed to the players on point for the other team. And finally, what we have here is we do have the capture progress. I've been using that to try and see the numbers, but again, it's always reporting back as 0, so that's not working at the moment. And we've got a 0.1 here because if you use a while loop, if you don't have a wait in there, it's running instantly over and over and over again, which if you want something fast and snappy, great. But the problem is you need to give it a break, otherwise it's running too fast and it essentially breaks and times out. Essentially, it's in an infinite loop, so you must always put in a wait. 0.1 is perfectly fine. It's running 10 times a second. That's more than adequate for most things. But ideally, you want to try and stay away from rules whiles where possible, but sometimes they're unavoidable and they're needed. So next we have the on-player exit capture point. So this is where now it's set, as soon as they step off of it, it is then setting the variable to false, which means that this rule can then trigger again should the player go back onto it. And then it deletes the widget. And the reason why that we're not deleting it at the end of this loop is that if the player was off the point for a moment, then they're still seeing the stats for the flag when they're off of it for a brief moment. So it just makes it a bit more accurate. So now we're moving on to the AI segment. So we've already gone over the bots that spawn in the custom ones that we have set up. Now what we need to do is that we need to actually set them up to be able to play the objectives. Now what I do is that these custom bots, they've actually got quite a small amount of health. So what I've done is that I've boosted it up to 250 or 2.5 times, which at first you think that's a lot more than play out. It doesn't seem to be. I've tried to work out roughly. Still get headshots in one with a sniper rifle. But we needed a little weight in here because I'll notice if you don't have a weight, it doesn't seem to apply the health straight away. So it needs just a slight buffer. And then what we do is that I've got a subroutine here that will then let the AI have a look around for nearby vehicles. These are going to be ones that, at the moment, these ones just spawn in your base. So what we have is we've got a random array. Well, we've got an array of vehicles, but we're going to do random value in array. And the reason for this is I know that you could actually do a filter to try and find out specific vehicles, but I wanted to give it more of a more natural feel, as if the AI isn't always looking for a vehicle. It's sometimes going to pick a vehicle. So if we jump to the subroutine, we can see that the vehicle, so first of all, is that vehicle in the random array, is it occupied? Nope. Okay, let's check the next condition. Is the vehicle, the distance between the vehicle and the player, less than 150 meters? If it is, so if it's empty and it's less than 150 meters from the bot, then it will force that bot to position 0, which is the driver's seat of that vehicle. So once we've done that, we can now go to the AI scouting subroutine. Now this just more tells the AI where to go. So I'm first doing a check if the AI is alive, because we're going to be calling this later, and if you ask it to go somewhere when it's not, that's going to cause errors in the background, and we want to avoid that. So the first instruction is, are they in a vehicle? At which point we want to ask them to defend an area. So we're going to get the objective of one of the random flags that they are not in control of. So if the objective is not in control of the team that they are in, then they will go and defend it. Now it's got a defend radius, so you've got a minimum and a maximum. So we don't want to be going directly onto the flag. So we've set up like a perimeter of 10 meters, and then they can go up to 50 meters around it. So almost like sort of patrolling around it. Yeah, unfortunately, they don't seem to listen to this rule and just go straight on top of it in some cases. Either that or the pathfinding's got issues in some areas, but we'll find out later. So if they're not in a vehicle, what we then want to do is do a further check. Get a count of all the flags. Are they in control of the team, of the AI? If they are, then we want them to now go and start defending the objectives. So we can say get a random position of all the flags that they own, and then go and defend one of them. And we're saying between on the point itself and up to 30 meters. So they're now playing a more defensive role. However, if they don't have all the objectives, then we're saying go to a random capture flag that you do not own. And there's no like minimum or maximum value. They just go straight up to the flag. And what we want to do is try and make them a bit more human-like, is to set their speed to sprinting. By default, I don't think bots actually sprint. So that's what happens when the bots deploy. So it'll wait, give them their health, try and assign them a vehicle, and then direct them on where to go. Now, to try and make them act a bit more human-like or a bit more a bit more natural. We've got this on player enter capture point. So this is for the AI. If they entered a capture point, and if that capture point is not one of theirs, then it's going to wait 2 seconds. So we have some time to get into the captured area. And then, again, if they're still alive, because they might get shot within those 2 seconds. If they are alive, if they're in a vehicle, again, we're trying to reinforce them to defend the position of where they are. If they're not, then they're going to try and defend more closer to the objective, so between 0 and 15. And the reason I've done a wait is if they approach from different angles, it's to try and make, rather than them going from the center of the objective, it could be that they're defending from a certain corner of the objective or from a certain direction. Again, just to try and make it feel a bit more natural. But if it's not, but if it is an objective that they own, so say as if they were a bit late getting to capture point A, their team's already taken it. When they get onto that, we're going to tell them to go scouting again. So it'll check the rest of the objectives, right, what's not been taken, now go run off and take one of those instead. By that point, they've already been running, so I want to make them run a bit slower, so it's a more investigative run, so they're more likely to shoot at people along the way. Then we've got the AI target shooter. So this is on player damaged. So if it's an AI soldier, it's essentially saying make sure that the team of the player isn't the same as the other player, which means it's not them killing themselves. Well, it's not them attacking themselves, and it's not friendly fire either. And what this will do is that it'll, if they're stuck in a sprinting mode, if you tell them to run or walk, they don't do it. It's almost like a sprint is a toll until they stop moving. So if we tell them to defend from where they are up to 15 meters, it will stop the AI in their tracks and change their movement, which gets them out of sprinting. We can change it to an investigative run, which means that they actually start engaging in combat as they move around. And ideally, you want them to prioritize the target that shot them. Then what we're doing is that we're doing a wait of about 15 seconds, which should be plenty of time for them to be able to finish up their fight. If they're still alive, then we want them to continue on going to an objective. So that's where we're going. If they're still alive, in fact, we don't actually need that alive anymore because we have already got that in here, where we've got to check if they are alive. So this is part of the cleanup process. And essentially what we're going to then do is to prioritize them moving again. So that's if they get the kill, or say as if someone else gets the kill, then they're just going to be defending forever unless we call this AI scouting. So it's more like a fail-safe, if you will, or safety net. But then if we say if the player gets a kill, then we want to go straight on scouting again. In fact, we don't really need this one either. We don't need that because whoever they kill, we still want them to go on scouting. And then we can actually, again, set it to more an investigative run. If they've got in combat, there's probably other enemies nearby, so we can put them on more of an alert behaviour. And exactly the same with a kill assist. If they get an assist, we want them scouting again afterwards, unless they get into more combat. And then finally, again, to try and break them out of that behaviour when sprinting, we've got this behaviour of if it's, again, an AI and it's ongoing this time. In fact, ideally, we want to have an alive as well, because you don't really want this tracking when they're dead. Get the player soldier, and we want to check if they're AI, are they alive, and then the distance between the closest player to them that's on the opposite team to the player if they're within 30 meters. So if they're within 30 meters of another player, we want the AI to try and get into more of a defensive behavior. So we can say, get the position of the closest player. And what we're saying is I notice this is 30 meters, whereas we're saying, well, get as close as 10. You don't want to get in melee distance, at least not to begin with. And the maximum of 25. And this is to try and encourage them to move towards the target. And because they know that someone's nearby, we want to set that target to the AI as well. And we want to change them from sprint to run so that they're ready to engage. And again, you know, that other player might run off in the opposite direction. So we have this fail safe of wait 15 seconds. If nothing's happened, right, go back to sprinting, you're now scouting again. And that covers us for the AI. And the last thing that we have is the team switcher. So there's these mannequins target shots around the map. Though in the package at least, I've got it set up so that there's one on either team in the page queue. And if the player interacts with interact point 998 or with 999, then it'll run this rule. So it'll undeploy the player. It'll then change them to the other team that they are on. Because we've got the undeploy rule where it deducts a point from the player, we actually want to add a point back on because we don't really want to punish them for changing team. So just to be nice to them, we just add an additional point to the team so that it doesn't hinder them. And that is how Conquest works in its current state. And I know that there's probably quite a lot to take in on there. And I wouldn't expect you to just pick up and learn everything right away because there's people do things in different ways as well. And this is bound to change a bit over time. But the key point of this entire program is to try and automate as much as possible for you, the player or the creator that's just wanting to add in, just create a map and be able to put Conquest on there. So one of the questions that I do get quite a lot is, why do this in blocks? You know, what's the advantage over this, over script, or, you know, what made me do this? Well, the reason being is that I've been using blocks with 2042's Portal for the last 4 years. So I'm fairly familiar with this, and to be able to put this mode together, it's a lot quicker and more efficient for me in my workflow. And that is about it, really. And from what I've come across so far, I've not been hit by too many limitations. I've been able to pretty much achieve everything I've wanted to. There's been some things I've had to scratch my head about, but for the most part, blocks you can do, I'd probably say, most things that you could do with scripts. And I think this is just an example of that. Don't get me wrong, there's probably things within script that could be done a bit more simpler or a bit easier, but that's the pros and cons with the different methods. But I do hope that you have found this somewhat useful to be able to get a better understanding. But again, please don't feel worried if you feel a bit overwhelmed with the information. This has been a big project in any case to try and get working. There's a lot of learning on my part, especially with the UI stuff. And I'm fairly certain there's ways that I could do things a lot better in any case that I've not learned yet. So there'll probably be people criticising the way I've done stuff. That's absolutely fine. This is all part of the learning process as we get used to these new tools and new features that we have access to. But it's all part of that journey. But thank you guys. In any case, if you guys have any questions at all, then feel free to either leave them in the comments or within the Battlefield Hub community Discord, where there is the Custom Conquest forum, where you're more than welcome to ask away with questions there as well.